News story from the New York Times. There was a former New York Police Department officer, goes by the name of Thomas Webster, who turned himself in on Monday as a result of his involvement in the Capitol Hill riots. And so, as we know, we have a bad popo segment on this show, and this guy is a former officer, and he was there. He was sort of caught up in the fervor. And this is somebody that you might think, well, very, highly trained person, somebody who is generally responsible, knows about the rules, follows the rules, law and order type of individual. He also got caught up in the fervor. And so we want to go through this story. I'm not endorsing what he's doing at all. I'm not trying to defend him. I'm not trying to skewer him with this. I just want to show you sort of how easy it is for people to get caught up in something, even despite their background, despite somebody who is typically sounds like he had a nice career in law enforcement. He was also out there breaking the law. Let's get into it. Retired New York Police Department officer guarded the Capitol, who guarded City Hall, charged in the Capitol riot. A retired New York police officer who was once part of the security detail at City Hall was charged on Tuesday with assaulting a police officer with a metal flagpole during the riot on the Capitol. The former officer, Thomas Webster, was a part of the NYPD unit, provided security for the mayor, Gracie Mansion, and the City Hall, according to a law enforcement official. He retired back in 2011. 54 years old, former Marine, surrendered to the FBI on Monday, charged with 6 counts relating to the attack of an officer from the Metro Police Department in D.C., his participation in the violent attempt to stop Congress from certifying the presidential election results. A federal prosecutor said there were videos of Mr. Webster attacking the Washington officer, first with a metal flagpole that had earlier been flown, a Marine Corps flag, and then with his bare hands. So, the excuse here, one big point that I want to make sure that we cover is there were a lot of people saying after this all happened that the cops let all the white people go, and, had this been a different demographic, they all would have been murdered and killed, but because they're white, they all got away with it. That was sort of one narrative, which I don't think is accurate or true. The next narrative was that it was law enforcement who were helping other rioters, which I haven't really seen strong evidence of that. We do see that a number of them have been suspended. Others are still under investigation. So we'll see if that evidence comes out and it changes. We'll see. But we also sort of had this idea that law enforcement who were involved were not going to get prosecuted. Sort of this blue shield thing was going to go up, and they were all going to be protected from any malfeasance. Well, that's not the case here. We have a former police department officer who has turned himself in, and he's being prosecuted with it. And I think that is the right call. So I want to just pause and make that point, because it's important we don't miss that. The standard here is being held. They are prosecuting, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI is prosecuting another law enforcement person, one of their own, which it should be. That's the standard. Prosecute everybody equally. Back to the article. New York Times says, according to the court documents, the officer wrestled the flagpole away from Mr. Webster. The former Marine tackled the officer, pinned him to the ground, straddled him, attempted to rip off his face shield and his gas mask, an attack that left the officer unable to breathe. These videos shock the conscience, said prosecutor Benjamin Gianforti. He said Mr. Webster had shown an utter lack of compassion and pursued the officer he attacked like a junkyard dog. The government did not immediately identify the officer. Among the most serious charges he faces are assaulting an officer with a dangerous weapon. 20 years in prison is the maximum. His lawyer, James Monroe, said his client traveled to the Capitol to engage in a lawful protest because he regarded the election as unfair. The lawyer said Mr. Webster acted in self-defense after the officer punched him. He went there as an American citizen to protest, an event that was urged on by our former president, so blame Trump, to protest an issue that Tom felt very strongly about. That's protecting the Constitution, which is this pretty good language there from his attorney. Mr. Gianforti said that he has seen no evidence on the videos that Mr. Webster had been punched by the officer before the assault. So, and Gianforti is the prosecutor. So no evidence that the officer punched him first before he assaulted them. And a little bit more about this guy before we dive into the press release from the FBI, from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It says here, Mr. Webster is a married individual, 3 children, owns a landscaping business in Florida, New York, 65 miles away from New York City. Semper Fi Landscape and Design, which is named for the Marine Corps motto. Never been arrested before. Turned himself in nearly 7 weeks after the riot. And close to a month after the FBI posted pictures of him online, said that it was seeking the public's assistance in identifying him. On court proceedings that happened yesterday, the judge agreed with the prosecutor that the videos he had seen were shocking. Mr. Cruz, the judge, acknowledged that before January 6th, Webster had been a model citizen. He said it found it to be a difficult case, but he said that his proud and impressive record as a public servant made the video of his attack on the officer all more upsetting. Ultimately, the judge said the undercurrent of political hostility that appeared to have led a person with a previously exemplary life to act in a violent manner had not dissipated, and Mr. Webster could still be considered a threat to public safety. He ordered him held without bail pending another hearing, which I think is the wrong move. I mean, honestly, I think that's the wrong move. I think that most of these people should be out with bail or on some pretty strict release conditions. Check in with the pretrial services division or however they do things in DC. But to hold these people in custody because of one interaction, I think is just too harsh. But I understand why the judges have to do that. And he's probably, if this had been another assault on an officer somewhere else, I think they would have granted him bail. They would have allowed him to post a bond and get out of custody, especially if he's a former officer, especially with no priors. So what the judge is doing here is probably being a little bit overly strict on this officer, in my opinion. But he may need to do that. And this is kind of a rarity. Usually the cops kind of get a little bit of a slap on the wrist. Yeah, you're good to go. This judge is probably responding to a lot of the political pressure, probably is keeping, I think a lot of other people are being held still. Other stories that we've covered, they're still in custody. So he's just kind of playing, even Steven across the board. All right, let's take a look at the justicedepartment.gov press release released yesterday, Tuesday, February 23rd. Retired officer arrested. They said he was arrested stemming from the attack. Already got all that. Thomas Webster, town of Florida, charged by criminal complaint. Let's take a look at the different charges. So first and foremost, one count of assaulting, resisting, opposing, impeding, intimidating, interfering with any person or officer of the United States in performance of their duties. We have another, so that's the first count, one count there. We have another count, obstructing, impeding, interfering with law enforcement. Another count. We have another one for unlawful entry, engaging in disorderly or disruptive conduct, engaging in an act of physical violence against any person on restricted building grounds, and armed with a dangerous or deadly weapon. Also, one count of violent entry and disorderly conduct in the Capitol grounds. And so you see there, those are those 6 charges. Webster voluntarily was taken into custody yesterday, and there was a detention hearing today. He's got a future court date on March 3rd. So he's going to hang in custody there for about another week while they get things settled for his appearance date on March 3rd. All right, so this is where we get some of the probable cause information. So here is from the U.S. Attorney Justice.gov website. There it is. All right, here it is. The affidavit in support of the criminal complaint against Webster alleges that body-worn camera depicts Webster's assault on the Metro PD officer who was assisting the U.S. Capitol Police. They say the body camera shows that Webster, who's wearing a red, black, white snow jacket, blue jeans, brown boots, approached a Metro PD officer who's barricaded behind a metal gate. Webster was carrying a large flagpole with a U.S. Marine Corps flag on it, waves his finger at the officer, yelling, "You effing piece of S, you effing commie MFer. Man, come on, take your S off, take your S off." After berating the officer, Webster aggressively shoves the metal gate behind which the officer was standing into the officer's body, then arms himself with the metal flagpole. The footage shows Webster raising the metal flagpole above his head, forcefully swinging downward, striking the metal barricade directly in front of the officer. Webster then attempts to attack the officer by lunging toward him with the metal flagpole, striking the officer with the flagpole numerous times. And so that's the assault on the officer. That's the conduct that is certainly criminal. Webster proceeds to break through the metal barricade, begins charging towards the officer with clenched fists, ultimately lunges at the officer, tackles him to the ground. Affidavit in support shows additional footage posted to an open source Twitter medium captures the assault and shows Webster pinning the officer on the ground, straddling him while he tries to forcibly remove the officer's face shield and gas mask. According to the affidavit, the officer could not breathe during the assault and was being choked by the chin strap. So the judge is right. I mean, that's pretty aggressive behavior, and a lot of it. You can, in these types of cases, you can sort of a lot of the times what you'll see is a little bit of buyer's remorse, right? Somebody threw the punch and they know as soon as it left, that was the wrong move. You can sort of see it in their face. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I knew I'm in trouble. You can see videos like that. You can see altercations like that. It's just a spur of the moment, single serving, bad decision. Then you have situations like this where it's just one after another and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And then you end up with a picture that looks like this. So apparently this is him, allegedly. That's the officer. We've got a metal baton there. We've got some actual physical contact there. Looks like, he's going after the mask. So troubling stuff. We got video footage posted to YouTube also depicts Webster on the staircase leading up to the Upper West Terrace of the U.S. Capitol building, according to the affidavit. In that video footage, where he appears to be wearing a dark blue or black body armor vest over his torso, he says into the camera, "Send more patriots. We need some help." These cases are being prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, Counterterrorism Section, U.S. Attorney's Office, SDNY, Southern District of New York. Also got the FBI Washington there. Criminal complaint is a formal accusation, not evidence of guilt. Presumed innocent unless proven guilty. So this will certainly be moving forward through the justice system, and we'll continue to follow it along. So let's take some locals.com questions. Looks like we got one here before we jump into the next segment. It says, this comes from Jeremy Matrita, says, "In my opinion, the protest and the riot are two distinct events that happened in proximity of each other. The protest began over a mile away from the Capitol. The riot began before the protest speeches ended." Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, I think that that's a fair way to differentiate between the two. You've got a lot of people out there standing peacefully, chanting, shouting things, waving signs, waving flags, participating in American democracy as we've heard defined elsewhere around this country for other contexts. And I'm talking specifically about the summer unrest of 2020. And a lot of that was very similar to that. It became a problem when they started breaching the barriers and then interacting with law enforcement officials. That was the riot. And so what it sounds like what the FBI is doing, and we've already seen prosecutions from the U.S. Attorney's Office doing the same thing, but they're prosecuting people who were not part of the riot. They were prosecuting people who were part of the protest. And that's where some of my concerns come into play. All right, so that's that for that. Thank you for the question, Jeremy.